Hey, there we go. Hi, everyone. Sorry about that. Uh, had a little bit of a technical error where I was all set up, ready to go live, and then all of a sudden the camera was not working. It's like, oh crap, please tell me this is not happening again. And all I had to do was just jump out, jump back in, and I was fine after that. So a little bit of a slow morning, but hey, we're getting there. So yeah, today we are going to be doing some more painting. I will admit that I have been doing some painting off camera. Remember that guy with the big fist that I was working on last week? Well, yesterday I, for some reason, was just not in the mood to write. So instead, I did a little painting. So here's my newest little guy here. I've got him mostly finished. I'm still debating whether I'm going to do any blackwashing on it. I'm quickly figuring out that maybe doing a white primer was not the best idea when it comes to like shadows and stuff, but I'm pretty happy with how he has turned out. Yeah, I think he looks very handsome and distinguished. So, and today I'm going to be working on this guy. He's actually my newest of the models that I've put together. He was one of the freebie ones, but I decided I wanted to take a little bit of a break from my Marines, and I'm going to focus on painting a different figure. So, already painted him all black because I'm planning on trying a dry brushing technique on him. But anyways, let's get our video pulled up. So this topic was decided upon by a whim of mine yesterday. So, as you all probably know, I am a writer. I write short stories, free verse poetry, and comic books. We're actually gearing up to start back work with, or start back up work with Next Evolution, because the fourth issue, we're working on the fourth issue right now. So I do have quite a bit of experience with creative writing. Sorry, I'm trying to get this all set up. But I've also, both in my adulthood and in my childhood, have been in a couple of creative writing groups or creative writing programs. And a lot of people have been turning against those these days because turns out the people running a lot of those programs, they have their own biases themselves. And from my experience, I've been in good programs and bad programs. I've been in programs where I have learned a lot about the technique of writing, learned about different styles of writing. I've even had some like good workshopping experience with other would-be writers. So, and I've also had some where I'm just sitting there and I'm like, why am I here? And you're not giving me anything that I can learn from, so why am I here? So, writing programs can be hit or miss. And I will admit that a lot of writing programs are pretty much just the instructor huffing their own farts, which is not very constructive when you want to learn more about how to improve your skills as a writer. But it is what it is. So let's it's by Writing Conscious. So let's see what he has to say about the topic, and I'll jump in with my opinions.
Creative writing programs, aka writer indoctrination camps, aka the MIC MFA factory system, have destroyed great literature.
I love the Ted Kaczynski shirt. Again, from my experience, I haven't had too many where they were indoctrination camps. I've never been to one where they were trying to like push an ideology on me. I've been to the one where, like I said, it's just the instructor huffing their own farts. but I've never been to one where I felt like they were trying to push me in a specific ideological direction.
And killed dangerous writers because since the 1960s, Cold War governments and intelligence agencies have systematically attacked literature through the creation of these writer indoctrination camps. And guess what, you guys? It has worked. The strongest artistic medium, literature, that can deliver both empathy and knowledge simultaneously at a level of complexity that music and movies can't even come close to, has now become obsolete. We are living in a post-literate era where there is little to no interest in ambitious literature. And how can that be the case, though?
Mm, I would also disagree with that. I wouldn't say there are no programs who don't want to, because I follow several authors on X, and quite a few of them have been extremely critical of the modern era of writers. So I wouldn't say, I think that's a tad bit unfair, but I will admit that, yeah, there is. I wouldn't say it's like Cold War era or it's trying to push a specific ideology. I think the simpler answer is that a bunch of corpos are like, hey, we want to sell more books. We want to sell. And then they decide to go on the internet and ask the internet, hey, internet, what sells? And the internet, being the internet, will just fart out the most ludicrous takes of what they want out of their books. And so the corporos, not really giving it too much of a thought, are like, all right, cool, we're going to try and invest more in these kind of things, even if it's like totally against everything that we have been for. This kind of looks like baby puke. I try dry brushing it on something that is not my figure first before I put it on my figure. That might be a good idea. So I think that's more of a simple thing. I don't think corporations necessarily want to, like, they have a giant conspiracy where they want to destroy art for art's sake. I think it's just as simple as dumb corporos listening to the wrong people about what they want to be produced. I really think it's something as simple as that.
Because over the past 60 years, we, yes, you and I, the taxpayers, have funded hundreds of thousands of creative writing degrees. We have funded endless grants, fellowships, and endowments for writers. And so where are the results? How the hell did a bunch of writers living in a world without electricity, with no funding, with no food, beat us at scale? We should be in a literary renaissance right now. And before Joey Bag of Logic Bro hops in the comments and says, what about this person? They got an MFA. Let me take the microphone really fast and school you, boy. Literary fiction and poetry is dead. And it's dead because when you put multiple generations of creative introverts that are self-conscious, young writers with no life experience, with big dreams, in indoctrination camps that hate dangerous writers, where divergent and insane personalities feel suffocated. How do you guys think some of the wild personalities of literature would feel sitting in a workshop with their warden who is politically correct?
I mean, the writers of old, they did have writers' workshops, but instead of going into nice, clean seminar rooms where there are like notebooks and post-it notes that are provided for you, and there's a water fountain and calm music, and everybody is just there to support each other, they went to dirty bars. just shit talked back to each other, being like, hey, does this shit sound good? I mean, I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about, dude? No, that shit does not sound good. I know you can do better than that, you asshole. That's what the writers of old were doing. They were just in a dirty bar, or they were in a cafe nursing a hangover, and they were just duking it out back and forth, trying to figure out what sounds good and what does not sound good. That is what the writers of old were doing. Let's be real, that's what they were doing. So it's like creative writing creative writing like workshops and groups have always existed in one form or another. It's just the more recent ones that have become more corporatized and become more like, okay, how do we make it so it's the most marketable book ever, that have kind of ruined writing to a certain extent.
With the other uncreative students that are just trying to tell mommy and daddy, I'm going to be a writer one day. Don't worry. How do you think they feel sitting in a room in a system that favors craft and readability over literature, that experiments with complexity, silence, forbidden ideas, and symbolism? And what if you continued that for decades and made sure that the publishing world favored writers with an MFA? And what if you filled the entire publishing world with former MFAs who favored the MFA style, which is a form, everyone, of genre fiction? The MFA novel and MFA programs teach a system of writing that is akin to the tropes in a airplane Western novel or romance. And if you make everyone forget what true literature is and make it so boring because the people writing it were the type of ladder climbers to be able to put up with 19 years of schooling, then you can kill an art form. And today I am not only going to walk you guys through the malicious start of MFA programs and their connection to the wacky stuff going on in the 1960s with the CIA and FBI being involved in the arts, but also walk you through what's happening in these programs and their grip and control on the entire industry. Because my goal is to create a literary renaissance with each and every one of you. Every reader and writer out there who loves literature needs to push back not only against slop. I see endless essays on romanticy, but really against the system that's not allowing ambitious writers to actually break free as a collective so that we can change literary culture and bring real books back into homes, into classrooms, and into general conversation out into the world. And so if you want to support me on that journey and be a part of the literary renaissance, then of course, subscribe, like the video, and let's hop into it. And so first we need to talk about the most important thing that is absolutely horrifying and has thrown us completely off course, which is for the past 90 years, writers have been being brainwashed to become more professional by creative writing programs. And the huge problem with this is that writers are generally idiosyncratic, introverted, weird people that as a whole are
Yes, we are. Oh, yes, we are. I will say, I find it a little strange how they're trying to push for this whole, oh, creative writers are just like you. They're professional, and they're like they enjoy their chai lattes and blah 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 blah. Blah. And it's like, no, the writers of old were fucking weird, and even their contemporaries or people who are around them would say that they were fucking weird. There was nothing ever like super professional about them. And I never liked turning writers into like, oh, we're just a bunch of like coffee shop bros, and we just, we're just trying our best to express ourselves, but we also don't want to make anyone feel unwelcomed. And it's like, okay, try telling that to someone who is like an Ernest Hemingway type of character, where that man was like drunk off his ass every other day. He was mean. He was not, yeah, he was just not the nicest person and very antisocial. And even his friends would tell you he was very antisocial. So I think it's a big, I think Because I'm not able to complete this point. Sorry. We'll continue now.
Not professional. As a whole, even if they are generally nice people, have some hot and weird takes and misalignments with society, do not function well in professional environments. And what's wild is that writers, more so than musicians, directors, actors, visual artists, have underwent this process of professionalization, because in the 1930s the first creative writing program was created, the Iowa Writers Workshop. And we're going to talk about Iowa a ton today because the mythology around it is profound. You know that Iowa, without me telling you, is the most competitive and prestigious writing program in the country, that if you can get into it, your career opportunities will be amplified. But for many decades, writing programs in the US weren't that popular. In 1975, there were only 15 creative writing programs in the United States. However, what we need to talk about is the last 50 years, because today in the United States alone, there are 250 creative writing programs in the United States. And if we add in Europe, Asia, Australia, and South America, that number gets huge, you guys. And this is important.
I'm just now realizing he's talking more about college courses and like schooling courses, which I do have experience with those too. And like I said earlier, I've had some experiences where it was fabulous, and I've had some experiences where I was just sitting there like, why the hell am I here? Like, this is absolutely useless information to me. Why am I here?
Important because in the last 50 years of literature, there has been the largest patronage change in literary history. Because right now, as writers, we have the opportunity, because of the internet, to write about whatever we want and not need institutions or wealthy patrons to support us. We don't need to censor ourselves, and we can use social media, Amazon, whatever, to distribute our thoughts and our writing, which makes us like the William Blakes, the Kafkas, the Emily Dickinsons, the Proust, that didn't need a patronage system. And this is our great.
Okay, so that I'm gonna have to stop you right there, fellow. Yes, there was absolutely a patronage system, but it wasn't a institutional patronage system. It was more of on an individual level kind of patronage system. So basically, if a rich person knew a poet or something and they just really liked them, they would just go up to that poet and be like, hey, I'll fund whatever it is you're doing, so long as you like write like my memoir, or you write like something, a really good piece that supports whatever it is that I want to be supported. And when you're a broadcast writer, what the hell are you gonna do? Like, you do need money and some business sense in order to publish your work. So you were kind of stuck with having to need a patron. And if you had like a good faith patron who really wanted you to explore your creative like juices, then it was great. But there were also some writers and even artists who they got stuck with patrons that they absolutely despised. So it's not that the patron system never existed, it's just it was different than how we see it today.
Disadvantage. This is how we can leave behind all the MFA slop. This is how we can create a literary renaissance if we step in to this moment, if we have the courage to do it. However, writers throughout time had to align with patronage systems, right? Whether that was the church, the courts, governments, political parties,
like I was
newspapers, publishing houses, magazines, wealthy patrons, or whatever. And what's wild is that many of our favorite authors that were born in the 1920s and 1930s experienced this golden era in literature. And I'm talking about the Cormac McCarthy's, the Thomas Pynchons, the Mishimas, where there was no dominant patronage system and publishing houses were willing to push ambitious literature. But something I never hear talked about is that it all ended when the center of literature started to be found in the halls of the university. Because in the 1970s and 80s, the university became the home of serious writing in America. And when a patronage system takes over, writers within that system have to align with the values of that system. For instance, if I was a writer in the Soviet Union, my literature had to align with Soviet ideology and sentiments, or it.
Oh yeah, the Soviet Union was, they were infamous for being like super up artists' assholes, making sure that the artists are, making art that supports Mother Russia, or making something that would be super flattering for the Communist Party. So yes, they were very, very, very guilty of that as well. But yeah, that is the, like I said, that is the thing with patronage. You're accepting the money, and you're kind of their whipping bitch until you don't need their money anymore, and then you can go off and do your own thing. That's why a lot of people are going indie these days, is because they don't want to deal with the bullshit of the patronage, so they just go off. And yeah, it's complicated business, because on one hand, having a patronage or having a publisher on your with like at your back or by your side, it would help you out financially. It would help you out in so many different ways that going about it by yourself absolutely could not. But on the other hand, you have to play by their rules. And when you have a bunch of writing courses that have a very specific like bent on how they want things to be done, you do run into that problem of people having a very specific idea of what they want from the arts, and they don't just want to change art in a sense of, oh, I want it to just go this way. They can change art to have it more of like either a religious bent or an ideological bent. So yeah, it is. Yeah, it's kind of why I've been kind of about getting into traditional publishing, because I would love to go into traditional publishing because it would definitely help me out in the financial sense. It would help me out in like the marketing sense, having a team to help me make my book the best possible version it could be, helping it get out there to all the different stores. So traditional publishing, I can see a lot of benefits to it. However, it comes to, I will have to pare down a lot of my creativity to fit the kind of book that they want, like the kind of book that they either find is the most marketable or the kind of book that they feel fits within their views and their ideas. And that is their right to ask that of a creative. You don't want to put out a book that is like completely the opposite of your ideological views. Like if you are, say, a Christian bookseller, you don't want to put out a book that is either atheistic or it is sympathetic to Satanism. So in that sense, it makes sense that for a patron to be like, hey, if you're going to write for me and accept my money, you have to write stuff that I like. But yeah, it does limit you.
Wouldn't it be amplified? And most likely it would be censored, and I maybe would get killed. The same if I was a 16th century writer in Europe. My work had to align with the church's theology. But what's wild, and we could say the same thing about directors, you have to align with Hollywood or whatever. But what's wild is that literature fell into the worst trap of all. Because yeah, it sucks to have a patron, right? But we've seen countless artists, Shakespeare and everyone else, work within those patronage systems with boundless creativity and say, you know what, screw it. I can still do everything I want, basically. However, what does the university value, you guys? It values credentials, institutional language, and this weird specialization.
And that is something about creative writing that I am absolutely against. The fact that you like need to go to a top university to be an author, or you need to be going to these specific courses to be an author. And if you're not, then you might as well just be like those like underbelly authors who are handing out dirty pamphlets on the streets. And it's like, I am firmly against that. For me, if you want to be an author, you are better off going to a business school to learn the business of publishing and the business of like learning about patronages or whatnot, and then going like back to the author dirty bars where you're just shit talking to each other and you convene with each other on how to make the best possible art. Because a lot of universities, creative writing programs, yeah, I guess spoilers here, the creative writing program where I was just sitting there like, why the hell am I here? That was in college. And it really says something when the creative writing programs that I was a part of when I was in high school were a lot more thorough, and they helped me develop my creative chops a lot better than the one in college. So, just saying.
It values networking in a professional manner. It values the cautious consensus and readability. It values peer review, which also exists outside of STEM fields within the humanities also. It values methodologies that you can track and teach, but we know with creativity and with especially something as complex as writing a 400,000 word novel that you can't measure that, you can't track that. And those things I just listed is how.
I mean, you can, but again, that's not for the corpos to decide. That's for you and your buddies shit talking in a bar to decide. I have done this on several occasions where I will write a poem at the bar after a few drinks, admittedly, and I would pester some of my fellow regulars being like, hey, can you read this for me and tell me what you think? And they'll be like, oh yeah, that looks right. Or this part kind of feels awkward. And before the Crisis on Independent Earths project was announced, I actually messaged John Boya about a poem I was writing for my mother. For some reason, my family really wants me to write poems for them for Christmas time. But anyways, I wanted to write this specific poem for my mother, and after finishing it, I felt like something was missing about it. And I messaged John with a picture of my poem being like, hey, what do you think of this? I feel like something's missing here. And he gave it a read, and he was like, yeah, I think you could add a little bit more on this section or expound more upon this section. And I had a good thunk about what he told me, and I figured it out and showed him again. He's like, yeah, that looks a lot better. So yeah, like I have honestly gotten better at writing just by asking random people around me to I wasn't pestering, like being really annoying. I'm just being like, hey, do you have a second? Can you read what I wrote? And that has been more valuable to me as a writer to grow than anything I learned in college, to be perfectly honest, or even just random internet comments. Anyways, I've been pausing way too much.
You become professionalized. And because you cannot track or codify actual creativity, you can't codify Blood Meridian, the universities had to substitute something else in, which is the ability to be fluent with the standard of serious writing that these university professors and programs created. And as we've seen, those standards and being able to follow those standards does not mean that you are a good writer. It means, though, that you can be seen as a contemporary writer. And this is where the CIA comes into play, everyone. This is where things get wild. And so let's talk about Iowa and the early writing programs. All of them were developed within this Cold War atmosphere that valued what? You guys know about the Cold War and American propaganda. They wanted what? Individual experience, individualism, focus on objects, modernism, formalism, and most importantly, political ambiguity, because all these programs were connected to funding that was inherently anti-communist. And this isn't a conversation like, you can hate communism. I don't like communism. But the original objective of creative writing programs in America was to produce anti-communist writers, which is wild because it created our modern conception of the American and Western writer, who is the private person that doesn't give interviews, the Thomas Pynchon, the Cormac McCarthy, the person that doesn't ever fall into being philosophical, but writes about domestic experiences, that writes about kind of these moral choices that individuals have to make. And that's fine. The novels like that are fine. Some of the greatest novels of all time were produced by writers like that. But when you start to push this idea of show but don't tell, the greatest and most overused piece of advice in creative writing programs, suddenly young writers who are ideological, that are, filled with fire, suddenly don't allow their narrator to go on a philosophical rant. Yeah, when you're 22 and your narrator is ranting about something, yeah, maybe that's not the best idea. Maybe that's not a masterpiece. But what does that lead to? 5 or 10 years down the line, it leads to a writer that can do that, but hide it, that can make that nuance, that can take that pressure, that can take that energy and turn it into something beautiful. And right now over on Substack, this is happening. John Pastelli, who serialized his novel Major Arcana on Substack and then had it picked up by a major publisher, is saying wild things and coalescing a following. I am reading right now on Substack, or I should say subscribing to dozens of authors that are pushing the limits, that diverted away from these MFA publishing funnels and are voicing and trying to carry on true literature. And Substack is the home of the literary renaissance. And it's where I host the Right Conscious Book Club, which is the most active book club in the world.
I'm on Medium, by the way. I mostly just publish articles about, comic books and anime movies I watch. Sometimes I do a think piece, but I find that those are not the most popular ones. But whatever.
We are reading 28 transformative novels in 2026. It is where I host countless literature and writing courses, where I host the Symbol Literacy course, which teaches you guys how to reintegrate symbolism back into your writing. And by studying great symbolic literature of the past, I have the William Blake, David Foster Wallace, Cormac McCarthy course, countless courses on writing, countless variety content over there if you monetarily want to support me and help fund the Literary Renaissance magazine, which...
Don't listen to these creative writing courses. Come and support my creative writing course. I know, I'm just yanking his chain a bit there, but I just find it so funny that he goes on this rant and then it's like, by the way, I have my own course here. There is something funny there. You gotta admit.
Isn't going to feature any of this minimalist slop. And if you don't want to do that, go pick up a Literary Renaissance t-shirt, a Ted Kaczynski t-shirt. I have 50 designs over there. And if you don't want to hop on Substack or pay anything at all, in the description down below, I also have a link to a guide to the 500 best novels. Yes, 500. It is better than any other guide online, and you can get that for free. But get on Substack, support other writers. You will find someone who is writing exactly what you want, and you can literally communicate with them and support them and make them and give them that fire just by hitting the like button and saying great story. That will help create a literary renaissance. And so thank you guys for being here, and you won't hear from me again in this context for the rest of the video. And when we talk about this idea of the dangerous writer, that's exactly what we are looking for. There are countless amateur authors out there who, when you read their work, their short stories, their poems, they're just ranting, they're raving. It's boring, it sucks, it feels like you're reading something silly. But Tolstoy and Dostoevsky did not have their problems. Their characters rant and rave all the time, and it feels, I'm into it. Herman Melville, Captain Ahab, Frank Herbert, oh my God, the God Emperor of Dune is just Leto II ranting. I'm in it. And what's even worse, when you subvert thinkers, writers, from being able to write about history, about what's going on, about their ideologies, you get a whole group of people that are politically aware that in their social life, say, oh my God, I'm so sorry I said that joke, or like whatever, but have no power, have no force behind that. And that's actually the dialectic that we are dealing with in the world of literature today. On one side of the aisle, you've probably seen them cropping up. we have the response to all of this with the return to the classics crowd, with the people saying, why are there no conservatives in literature? And you want to slap these people and say, I don't want liberals or conservatives in literature. I want ideological, insane people that are on fire, that are artists, that fall into no electoral category.
I do very much agree with him on that. I hate the weird debate that's going on of, oh, this is the reason why there are no conservative authors here. It's because you guys don't want to be artistic, or, oh, we need more of this author here. Oh, you need to accept more liberalism in order to be an artist, or, oh, you have to be this, or, oh, you have to be that. I fully disagree with that kind of stuff, because it shouldn't really matter for me where you are politically, so long as you are writing your truth. And sometimes that truth can be conservative, sometimes that truth can be liberal. I think I do tend to run a bit more conservative nowadays, just because I've gotten older and a bit, more grizzled and a little bit more uh, very, very, very vocally critical of a lot of liberalism, especially nowadays. But I do still maintain a good bit of my liberalism, just because there are some things about liberalism that I 100% agree with, and there's some things in conservative that I 100% agree with. I'm kind of a mixture of both. So this argument of, well, you need to be more of this or you need to be more of that in order to be a writer, I am against. It's just like, are you good or are you not? Okay? It really doesn't matter where you are in the political aisle. If you're good, you're good. If you're bad, you're bad.
That have been cultivating a unique worldview away from all of that, and will say things within their work that will piss off the Christian mom in Eastern Washington or the liberal man in Vermont, and then at the same time captivate those people. And earlier I was speaking about the CIA and all of that. Well, in the 1960s and the 1970s, the CIA had their hands in the National Endowment for the Arts. They had their hands in all the university programs. And during that time, all of these new creative writing programs were popping up, and many of them were being created and staffed by graduates of the Stanford Writing Program, of the Iowa Writers Workshops, who were in alignment with this new anti-doctrine, professionalized ideology. And this was such a wicked move by intelligence agencies and the government, because during this time, the television was taking over. Opportunities for writers, were starting to dry up. And the idea of being a famous writer or being a full-time writer has always been a pipe dream, you guys. And writers, more so than other artistic mediums, are less extroverted to force themselves into society, to force their work out there. And so the creation of programs and a new class of jobs, a new system of professors, endowment boards, or whatever, made it possible for writers who would have never made it, who weren't that good but were more professional, could follow the rules better, to find an opportunity to make it, and thus increased the fanaticism to get these positions, to follow the codes, to follow the ideologies. And these fanatical and uncreative students were the ones that got into the creative writing positions that they are still holding today. And what's even worse is that they have been the kingmakers, the ones who have hired on the next board, which is a class of simulacrum writers who are becoming copies of writers who were never writers in the first place. And my favorite example of this is David Foster Wallace, who did receive an MFA. But what's wild about Wallace is that when he showed up at the University of Arizona, he had already published a novel at 21, The Broom of the System. And when you show up with that type of aura, of course everyone's going to hate you, because none of his professors, none of his other fellow students had published anything significant, and Wallace was already a better writer than all of them. And even worse for Wallace, and this happens all the time, was that his program was entrenched in minimalism. So in the late 1980s, writers like Bret Easton Ellis, Chuck Palahniuk and stuff came out of this system that loved minimalism. And if you know David Foster Wallace, he is the opposite of minimal. And Wallace's professors and fellow students were so hard on him, isolated him so much, even though he was a really good writer who was a maximalist, that he said, screw all of you guys, and sat in his apartment all day and drank and did drugs. And this led him to, after receiving his degree, ending up in a halfway house and not writing for 2 or 3 years. That's how creatively stifled he was. And I know that my time in a creative writing program, I got my bachelor's in creative writing, was so stifling. And in the comments down below, tell me about your experiences. Were you creatively empowered or were you stifled? And this stifling effect happens because in these workshops, in these programs, consensus becomes the god. Because what's wild, you guys, is that if you pick, like, for instance, the first time you read Cormac McCarthy, did you understand everything in his style immediately? No. But what happens is when you read great literature, when I read Thomas Pynchon, when you read Dune, any of these authors you like, what's asked of you is to become a new reader, to figure out how to understand this new work. But what the workshop does is reverse this and tells the writer that they need to make the work more accessible to the existing group, because the existing group is a bunch of 20-year-olds and a professor who is living their shadow creative life. And once again, we're also dealing with young writers who are trying to figure out how to develop that style that eventually can be understood. Because the more complex an author can be, but still be understood, means that, like, wow, they are really good. Like, I love Hermann Hesse and Siddhartha and some of these easier novels, and those are great, and that's a whole other field. The Stranger by Camus, great stuff, and that's really hard to make that stuff clean and really good, but they're adding complexity and layering into that too. Anyway, imagine if you brought in a very rough form of Infinite Jest, of Gravity's Rainbow, of Moby Dick into one of these workshops. That voice, that style, how would it be received? How would the categorization of the whale ship, how would these long rants by Judge Holden, how would the violence be taken? How would the N-word being dropped? How would all this crazy stuff being dropped be taken? And that's the problem with the workshop, because if you get a really good editor, for instance, I've been to the Cormac McCarthy archive. I have read the letters between Cormac McCarthy and his editor. I've seen the changes in the drafts. What Cormac McCarthy's editor did was just amplify what was already there. They didn't fix anything.
The conversation of minimalism versus maximalism is interesting, because there are some formats in writing where minimalism is honestly for the better. For example, comic books. I have been told by a couple of different people who are into writing comic books that, hey, you're being a little too wordy here. We need you to pare it down a little bit. Like, Martin, my artist himself, has told me, hey, you need to pare this down a little bit. This is a comic book, and you have to. And it's not because they don't want you to express yourself. I don't want people getting that idea. It's just when it comes to the medium of comic books, you, yes, have to explain or have a little dialogue, have a little personality in your writing, but you also need to give enough room for the art to be. You need to give enough room for the art to tell the story as much as your dialogue is. So in the format of comic books, it's honestly better for you to go for a more minimalist approach. Like, do as much of your style as you can, but go for more minimalism, especially with the dialogue. So you just let the art breathe and tell the story too. It's not just you as the writer, it is also the artist. The artist is also helping you tell the story. When it comes to a novel, however, that's where you get into tricky territory, because there are certain genres where it is beneficial for you to be a bit more descriptive. Like for, say, a political thriller, getting more into the dialogue of the characters, it is more to your benefit to let them just go off. When it comes to like a tween romance, you really don't need to go all that maximalist on it. So it really depends on the genre, what you're trying to go for. A lot of pulp stories are also fairly minimalist. There are actually two that I can think of right now that are on different ends of the minimalist maximalist spectrum. So you have Robert E. Howard. I could suppose nowadays he wouldn't be considered a minimalist, but when you compare him to someone like H.P. Lovecraft, H.P. Lovecraft was very much a maximalist. Like, you read his stuff, and he is just waxing poetic on just how strange everything looks and how strange everything is. And then you get Robert E. Howard over here being like, yeah, here are the bad guys. They look pretty awful. Here's a couple of descriptors of how they look awful. And our hero, who is kind of a brute himself, he takes sword and he cuts their head off. Robert E. Howard is extremely easy to read. That's why I do recommend him, especially to guys who say they're not into reading anymore, or they say that they just can't get back into reading anymore. I do recommend Robert E. Howard to them because he is honestly a very easy author to read. He's very easy to read, and by author standards, he is kind of a minimalist. So, but the minimalism kind of works for Robert E. Howard's style because he's mostly doing like action thrillers where you don't really need to wax poetic about the setting too much, or you don't really need to wax poetic about villain motivations. It's just popcorn. It's popcorn short stories, basically. Whereas when you come to cosmic horror and you're really trying to like layer on the atmosphere like H.P. Lovecraft does, then yeah, maximalism is very much the way to go. You really want to set the tone. You really want to set the scene of where the horror is occurring. So it really just depends on what you're going for.
The editor didn't walk into it saying, this is a draft, this isn't very good, you're a young writer, this needs to be fixed. No, he said, yeah, you're a 29-year-old writer and you're amazing, but I just need to help you bring some of this out more. And what this consensus creates is MFA genre fiction. So most writers that have gone through MFA programs, consciously or unconsciously, because of their programming, follow formal rules, which is what kind of genre tropes are. And when you look at the MFA novel, what do they value? Well, what makes the genre? Psychological realism. There has to be some biographical backstory into the trauma so that we can understand the motivation. There has to be, oh my God, concrete sensory details. There has to be the vanishing narrator at the end. There has to be indirect emotional revelation. There has to be some form of political awareness and maybe some slight offshoots, but it can't turn into this monstrosity. It can't go totally off the rails. It can be strange, but not strange enough where you can't pitch it to somebody. And these techniques are used all the time in novels, but when they're when they're used time and time again in the same way and readers aren't responding to it, especially readers that aren't within the institution that don't care about that, or we've just become burned out by it, which is partially true. A lot of MFA novels, a lot of MFA writers that have, risen the ranks are not bad writers. Like most people that make it through the program can sometimes write a decent novel, if not a good novel. But when they're the same novel, when it's endless MFA realism, we start to yearn for something. We start to yearn for some edgelording. We start to yearn for some metaphysical experimentation. We start to want something that's overwritten, that's purple prose. And to dive deeper into this, when you go into these programs, this is the advice that you get. There are 3 commandments of the MFA program. And this is common writing advice, but is actually deadly writing advice. Write what you know, show, don't tell, find your voice. However, what has Write What You Know created? It has created the endless marginalized voice novels. It has created the endless novels that elevate authenticity, trauma, and identity. And we have to work through it all. And the problem with that is that it may be good for a novel or 2. And that's why some of these novels are, they have a decent debut because you're just working with what you know. But the great writers, what they do is work with archetypal energy that they don't know. They start bringing in different energies that they've explored in the darkest elements of their self or their most ecstatic moments on drugs or all these different things and start colliding them. And that's where they get their value from. That's where a lot of the time true are. They get it from nature. They get it from God. And when you combine this with this idea of find your voice, what that means, it's very egotistical because find your voice means does this sound like
What was that noise? Someone must be working outside. The right what you know advice, I have thoughts because I do feel like the right what you know advice can limit people as a writer. Um, for example, I don't know what it's like to be a vampire. So, by that standard, I should not be writing a vampire novel. I should not be doing anything like that because I don't know what it's like to be a vampire, which is honestly very limiting and terrible advice because that's the whole point of speculative fiction is to speculate what it would be like. And on the other hand, you do need to, at the very least, take a bit of your experience and a bit of you and apply your experience and your you-ness into a situation that you probably have never been through yourself, but just you're imagining yourself there. That's the thing. It's just use your imagination. I say have never lost a limb in a car accident before, uh, obviously, but I could write a story about someone who gets in a serious accident and they're having to struggle with learning how to be again. And I just take, okay, how would I react to this? And not just like my identity, just as a person. I know for me as a person, I am probably going to be very depressed for a couple of months because my body is not the same as it was. But then eventually having to struggle and relearn how to live, then that's where the drama comes. So I have a very about right what you know.
Me, is this my thoughts out on the page? Your thoughts don't matter. You don't matter. What matters is like with Cormac McCarthy, who's the narrator in Blood Meridian? We don't know. It's like this weird, this detached, 19th century voice that's somewhat intellectual, even though it's in the third person omnipotent, that's somewhat framing the work and can find its way in at times. And McCarthy changes that voice. McCarthy, throughout different novels, can attune that because he's not worried about him. That's not the voice of Cormac McCarthy. David Foster Wallace said that he met Cormac McCarthy at the Santa Fe Institute and said it was the worst thing that ever happened because if you've heard Cormac speak before, he's kind of got like, yeah, he's kind of got just got a very gentle voice. And David Foster Wallace thought that he was like this like booming dark voice and like because that's how he reads a lot of the time. And I should say,
People probably think I'm a lot snarkier than I am. Now that I'm thinking about my writing, they probably think I would, if they read my stuff, they would probably think I'm a way more snarky, but also more artistic than I actually am. Because when now he's saying it, it's like, oh gosh, what do people think of me? Like, who do they think I am just based on my writing? Because I am very different from my characters. I'm not nearly as confident as my characters. I'm not nearly as sarcastic as my characters. So it does make me think, okay, what exactly are people thinking I'm like because of my characters?
at times writing, like I said, countless great authors have written about themselves. Cormac McCarthy wrote a novel about Suttree, about himself. Go read that novel. That voice, that narrator, the lyricism, everything is not simple. That's like the deepest levels of the soul being written about, plus a lot of fictionalizing and other wacky stuff going on. And then finally, what kills all of this is show, don't tell. Guys, if you want to kind of work with something that isn't yourself and be creative, you can tell, because that's awesome. That's creativity on the page. When Thomas Pynchon is going crazy, when Dostoevsky, Melville,
I think the best way to go with this, where actually telling does a little bit more of the heavy work than the showing, is the comic series Transmetropolitan, where a lot of the narration is just basically Spider Jerusalem just popping off about everything that's around him. And Spider Jerusalem has a very negative and nihilistic view on pretty much everything around him. So listening to how he paints the world versus the people he interacts with and what's actually going on, it does paint a very different picture of who he is as a character. Now, the world that he lives in, yes, it is very degenerate, but just the way he perceives it all is what makes it special. So in that case, yeah, where telling a character telling about a specific thing going on can show more of that character than just showing it objectively, because sometimes a character will have a completely different interpretation of what's going on.
Tolstoy, George Eliot are going crazy and telling and ranting, and they have these weird characters. It's amazing. Like, that's some of the most creative stuff that you can find in literature. My God, William Blake shows up and spends, his entire collected works telling you about what reality is, like through poetry. It's just him telling you, yes, this, the second level of your being is called Orc. And it's like, whoa. And this is this idea that, once again, the author has to disappear. The author can't have authority. The author can't stand up and be unique. They must disappear. The narrator must disappear. And you guys know what readers want? They want to be governed, you guys. They want to be led. I love to go explore something that I would never explore on my own. I love to be mind blown. I love to be taken down a path and switched around. Like, it's crazy. We like it. That's why when we go to the concert, say, raise your hands. We all raise our hands. And in the modern...
Okay, so he's more waxing poetic about just literature more than talking about the writing circles. He has done a good job talking about it, but he's way more just waxing poetic about the art of writing, which, yes, is important for this topic, but every time I do one of these, I have to keep reminding myself that they always look like shit at the beginning. All right, I think we'll stop there. How about, instead of finishing this video, I'll still link it if you guys want to finish it. I'll give my own experiences with creative writing. So when I was a teenager in high school, this is how I fell in love with writing. And you take this, you can call bullshit on this story if you want to, but this is literally how it went. So let me X-nay on the screen share. So when I was 15, I woke up one night and I just could not get to sleep. I don't know what it was, but I just could not sleep at all. And so, because the house was quiet, everyone else was asleep, I decided to try and figure out a way to entertain myself. And my netbook, my little laptop, was just sitting over there. So I thought, why not? So I opened it up and just started writing a story that was stylized after Edgar Allan Poe. It was very crappy looking back on it, but that's how I started writing, and that's how I fell in love with writing. And then in high school, two things. I took a creative writing class as like an elective, and my teacher for that class, she had us practice different kinds of writing. So we practiced script writing, we practiced short story writing, we practiced different perspectives like first person, third person, second person. We also practiced some poetry too, and different styles of poetry. There was the free verse poetry, there was the carpe diem style, there was the Shakespearean style of poetry. I learned a lot from that class, and I still have my portfolio where I had to present all these different short stories and whatnot as like a final project. I still have that portfolio, and I'm still very proud of it today that I was able to complete it. And then I was also part of this writing group called the Thurber House Young Writers Program, where basically we would all convene into I don't think we ever got into the actual Thurber House. We were at the building next to it all the time, but we would go there and we would read our stories and then receive some criticism or some like gentle suggestions from everybody around us on how we can improve upon our writing. Like, hey, we liked this part, but we think this part needs some tinkering with. And that was also very good for helping me not only tinker with my own personal style, but also get used to putting myself out there and also receiving criticism. Because when you are a creative, the most important thing you need to learn is how to accept criticism. Sometimes the criticism is bullshit. I will say that. Sometimes someone will come up to you and say, your stuff sucks, and so do you. And you are always going to get that as a creative. But sometimes the criticism is like, hey, I think that you could add a little bit more detail in this section and cut down upon this section, because this section is ultimately not important to the overall narrative that you're trying to build, but this could help you build more of what's going on in your world. And the Thurber House really did help me out with that. And then I went to college, and I went to college for psychology, and look how I applied that degree. But we did take a writing course in college. I did take a writing course in college, and oh my, that teacher was against rules in writing. Like any sort of narrative rules, any sort of structure. She was, I think they were they, actually, one of the they thems. They were very much against structure. They were anti limiting yourself. They were very much just huff glue and write whatever it is you want. One exercise that I remember very vividly is they took a pine cone, had us all sit in a circle, crisscross applesauce, put the pine cone in the center of the circle, and they were like, okay, now write whatever it is you are feeling with this pine cone. And I'm just, I remember we were all just kind of side-eyeing each other like, is this really happening? We did it because we kind of had to. And I remember they even canceled the final presentation project for, I forget whatever bullshit reason they were coming up with. But it was just the biggest waste of time, which sucks because that was probably the most expensive out of all of my creative writing programs. And if anything, there was a different creative writing. It wasn't so much creative writing. It was like the science fiction course where it was awesome. We got to read some science fiction stories and watch some science fiction movies, and then we would write essays, like trying to argue our interpretations of the piece. And I learned more about writing from that course, just writing my interpretations of these works, than I ever did from that creative writing course. In fact, one of the proudest I've ever been in college was we were reading Dark They Were and Golden Eyed by Ray Bradbury. And I wrote this essay of my interpretation of it, and I think I said something to the effect of the humans on Mars, them physically changing is symbolic for when people move to like a completely different area, like the settlers coming in from Europe over to America, and how they change. They slowly change in a way where they're not Europeans anymore, they're Americans. And for the humans changing on Mars, them physically changing to resemble the ancient Martians is symbolic to them coming into this new land with its own history and culture, and they change and mold to fit into the land. And my professor read my essay, and he wrote a little comment in there like, I never really saw it that way. And I felt so proud of myself that I was able to make my professor be like, never thought of it like that. So yeah, I feel like a lot of creative writing courses, they can be written off as bullshit, but I think the ones that specifically talk about technique and they emphasize working together to help encourage each other to both explore but also improve upon your style, those are the ones you want to go for. Those are the ones who will be the most helpful. The ones who are either trying to corporatize and try to basically beat you into a specific mold, or the ones who are like my college course where you just smoke a bowl and write whatever and yay, it's great. Those are the ones you want to avoid as a writer and a creative. Yeah. So anyways, I believe that will be it for today. I should probably close up. Yeah, my little dude. I tried the dry brushing, but it was just not looking good. So I'm going to try this, put a little gold film on it, work on the base a little bit. and hopefully he will look much more photogenic by the time I'm done with him. I think I still have a lot to learn with model painting, but anyways, if you liked the stream or if you liked the video I reacted to and you want me to react more to that kind of stuff, let me know in the comments. Let me know if there's anything else you want me to react to, and I will see you all in the next stream. Bye. Bloop. Bloop.